In one of our wonderful ELL teaching Facebook groups, there has been a request about collaborating with and training content area teachers specifically about assessing language learners. I happen to have just offered a short training to regional ELL teachers where I shared my specific ideas and strategies and resources for both push-in and pull-out instruction. I promise that I will share this with all of you. However, I realized that I still need to polish some of the things, take some of the pictures out, and perhaps add some clarifications before I can share this. So today I will just share my examples on accommodating assessments for high schoolers, and these accommodations will also apply to your middle school students and perhaps students in grades 4 and 5. It probably will look a little different in grades K through 3. However, some of these ideas might be helpful to those teachers as well. So my biggest suggestion for when I am collaborating with content area teachers is for both of us to take a look at the big picture and the final assessment. Always look at what you want for your general education students to get what will be the output of your teaching them. And then for your students level 1 and 2, and especially SLIFE students, together let's choose the instructional focus. Let's narrow it down to the most important concepts and realistic for our ELL students concepts to grasp without being overwhelmed. Our language learners do not need help getting overwhelmed. And once we identify this instructional focus, we will accommodate the teaching resources, AI, visuals, games, partner work, vocabulary that is displayed and referred to, and so on. For levels 3 and 4, I usually recommend to keep the content as intact as possible, but for sure to provide vocabulary banks and have them displayed and refer to them frequently. Also, for sure, offer sentence starters and frames so your students are empowered and are given wings to fly with these new vocabulary words, and also allows them to practice in a variety of group formations. If your school or district has not done Kagan structure trainings yet, I think it's a crime against all students, but language learners specifically. Talking about assessment, we have to talk about input and practice. Now, different resources call these 3 stages differently. You will see the words introduction, you will see application. I like to call it input, practice, assessment. I stress to teachers the importance of comprehensible and engaging and motivating input so that students can understand as much as possible and get interested and curious. I give teachers this white noise analogy and ask them to imagine that they are teaching a lesson that they have just prepared, whatever they have on the board, on the screen, on the walls, and now I ask them to imagine that the students are turning down the volume to a very, very low level so the teacher sounds more like white noise or background noise, because this is how a lot of times our language learners feel. How much would they get of what is being taught to them without hearing the teacher? If there is absolutely no chance to understand anything, that means that the teacher has not scaffolded any of the input, any of the introduction materials. If they see highlighted words, if they see charts, arrows, pictures, simplified texts that are also annotated, videos, if they see that the teacher is using gestures, the teacher is pointing to things in the classroom, to the charts, to the visuals, they are most likely going to understand a lot more, and this is what we want for our input of the material. Now, as far as the practice, it needs to be something that allows to practice the instructional focus. Remember, we have narrowed down the focus. Don't spread too thin. When it comes to assessment, you will want to assess what you have taught and practiced. Teachers are asking, how can I modify this or that assessment? The answer is in your head. If you know what you've chosen for your input, if you know what you have practiced, you should have a good idea of what and how you're going to be assessing it. If you were intentional about it, then you will know exactly what to expect on the outcome stage from these language learners, and you will most likely know how to assess them. If you've been using only cards to practice formulas of things, or if you used graphic organizers or short texts, then it is appropriate to offer them the same kind of format when you are assessing them. Now, let me give you a specific example of a recent assessment the biology teacher and I have done in one of the high schools I worked this year at. This was a photosynthesis summative. Before she started teaching this unit, she and I talked about what is the most important thing for our students to gain and what are the things that could be left out. I want to draw your attention to the fact that I do not feel comfortable making these decisions without the content area expert. It is important to ask our content area teachers for their opinion on what we should be focusing on. And then I, as the language expert, can create resources and guide the teacher in terms of the language of that content and the activities that will help our language learners practice this content and gain the language associated with it. So right away, she told me that she's totally fine with our language learners just focusing on the photosynthesis process, on the equation and the things that are related to it, but she was totally okay skipping the Kelvin cycle and the concepts and vocabulary associated with that cycle. I totally agreed with her because photosynthesis is what I call a template-like concept. It's something that is so big, so foundational, but relatively easy to access, even for language learners with the lower proficiency levels. If you understand this concept, it's going to be a magnet for many more similar ideas and a lot more scientific vocabulary and processes. When we chose this focus, I decided to create all kinds of resources to practice the photosynthesis. So I put together these interactive slides where students would first read the formula and then they would get to quiz themselves or each other, because I put these boxes here where they could name the molecules. Also, on a side note, this is cellular respiration equation, which is backwards from photosynthesis and which was part of the next unit of study. But because my language learners had studied this so much, cellular respiration was not an issue for them at all. Again, talking about this big template-like concept. After they practiced this concept on slides, we worked with manipulatives. Here are the cards. My students worked individually with cards, with partners in small groups, and then we also read short texts that I put through DIFIT, the artificial intelligence tool. So this was what some of our practice during the unit looked like. And now for the actual assessment. This is the modified assessment. You can see here 6 multiple choice questions that target the concepts that we chose as our instructional focus for our WIDA 1 and 2 level students. For question 1, as you can see here, I put boxes because remember, I had practiced with my students using cards and boxes on the slides. This question says write the equation for photosynthesis using words and molecular formula. As you can see here on the original copy, it is blank. But for my modified version, I wanted to give my students something to lean on so they can actually focus on the what of the formula and not the how. You also see 2 instead of 3 short response questions. One of them says, why do leaves change colors and fall off the tree in the fall? And the other one, what are the 3 factors that affect the rate of photosynthesis and how would you measure the effects? So instead of having my students try to come up with their own answers and try to remember the details of this content, because there is such an overwhelming amount of information coming at them from each subject area, I decided to give them a text for each of these 2 questions. And I just generated this in DIFIT, the artificial intelligence tool. I asked this very question and I put it at the grade level of reading, I believe, of 3. This also offers reading summary. If you're familiar with DIFIT, you know that. And it also offers questions which my students could answer to add some points to their summative assessment in general. Important note, because when I was teaching my students, I did rely on some of the native language support. In this case, it's Spanish. I did offer the translated copy as well and put it on the back 2 pages so they can refer to their native language to help clarify the content. However, they were reading the questions in English and they were reading the answer choices in English and they were writing their responses in English. Now, I do have to say that I have a very, very new student student who had only been in the US school for about a month before we took this assessment, so he actually took the test in Spanish and he didn't really use much of the English. It is a little bit too early for him. As you can see here, all of my students received A or B for this assessment. Needless to say, we were all very happy and felt empowered, and now they are ready for the new concepts that are based on the photosynthesis or are very similar or are simply using some of the vocabulary and processes from this phenomena. As you will see in the presentation that I'm sharing a link to below, there are a lot more activities that I have developed this year and that I can share. One of my other areas of passion is comprehensible input. Please let me know by putting a like to this video or by leaving a comment that you are interested in me sharing more of my ideas and practical examples. Thank you very much. Happy teaching, everyone.